welcome to Leadership and Reinvention, the podcast for leaders on a journey filled with twists, turns, and new possibilities. I'm Marissa Prazen, and along with my co-host Mike Cloutier, in each episode we explore the moments that spark transformation, challenge perspectives, and redefine success. Whether you're making a career shift or looking to lead with impact, this is your space to rethink, pivot, and grow. Let's dive in.
Hey everyone, welcome back if you're rejoining us, and hello for the first time if you're joining us for the first time. And hey to you, Marissa, how's things?
Everything's great. Thanks, Mike. How are you?
I'm fantastic, thanks. Well, I'm super excited because I'm thrilled that we have Aaron Leibtag joining us today. Aaron, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Mike and Marissa.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. Aaron and I met through his cousin and a friend of mine, Devora, and shout out to Devora because I love her. She's fabulous. And she thought it would be really interesting if we got together and connected. And so we did. And she was very correct. We ended up having a phenomenal first conversation. Then we went and had breakfast together. And then it became very evident that we were bonding on a few things that are very important to us, which we'll, I'm sure, talk a little bit about later on today. But the biggest thing is our interest in having a patient-first view of how life sciences, healthcare, and the worlds that we come from are delivered with what some people have formerly called patient centricity, but we like to use the terminology patient first. So we'll get into that. But Aaron, again, absolutely thrilled that you're here. Can't wait to hear about your reinvention story. And the way we usually kick things off is tell us a little bit about your story. Can't wait to hear all about it.
Well, wonderful. Well, first of all, thank you, Michael and Marissa, for really leading this podcast on this particular topic and inviting me on it. Yeah, when I look back at my career and journey that started in the expense payable department at TJX Canada, Winners, HomeSense, Marshalls, working in finance, to standing on stage with the leaders of Pfizer for Paxlovid or AstraZeneca for Enhertu in 2024, receiving the Prix Galien for Best Digital Health Technology. And I look back at that journey, it has been fully about constant reinvention, constant moving forward. So really excited to share that particular story with you. My background is outside of healthcare, and up until when I co-founded Pentavere with my partner, had no experience in the pharmaceutical industry, but was very, very fortunate early on working in organizations from KFC, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, to Winners HomeSense, to Canadian Tire, to private equity, all of which was around how do you create products, create value direct to consumer. I learned the power that when you have great data, great people, and great processes, magic happens. And I guess unfortunately or fortunately, I also saw that when that triangle is broken apart, when great data, great processes, and great people is broken apart, pain happens, disaster happens. And I lived through that journey as well, always from a finance perspective. So really understanding the nuts and bolts of the numbers. And I guess I would describe, my story is I was at a point of transition, like so many of us experience through our career. And I was having a conversation with a mentor. He was an executive coach, a very well-established business leader here in Canada, who said, Aaron, we can find you another corporate job, but 2 years later, you're going to be saying, what's next? What is your career going to look like? And at that same time, my current business partner now, a gentleman by the name of Stephen Aviv, we were friends. We live in the same neighborhood, and that's how we met. So it just really sort of, to share with the audience, you never know where your partners are going to come from that create that value. But here's also an individual who spent 20 years in finance, reeling from the reality of his mother just tragically passed away because what should have been a routine surgical procedure ended up just having a horrific outcome because data that her care team needed to know about post-operative care based on who she was as an individual, her comorbidities, her health, other issues that she had was missed. It was missed by her care team. And I want to be really, really clear, at no fault of her care team, because as we start to unpack what happened, it was buried in a clinical note. And here we are, sort of two finance folks, two people who, believed in that triangle that I just described. Great people, great data, great processes, magic. What happens when that triangle falls apart? How is it in an industry like healthcare that is a fifth of most countries' GDP? And as we start to unpack the problem, over 80% of the data that we create that has all the answers already documented around who we are, our diagnosis, our treatments, our outcomes, what may or may not work for us, is not used cost effectively, efficiently at scale to make health outcomes better. And we were just like, how is this possible? And as a response, the company we co-founded together called Pentavere was born in 2017. Now, we went into the journey of starting a company in an industry that we had no experience in, didn't know much about, but really believed in the magnitude of the problem and the size of the data set that's not currently being used. And the first thing we were humbled by was it's really, really hard to start a company. So, we weren't in our early 20s saying, let's, create a deck and go raise capital and get on that particular roller coaster. We said, how can we be successful? How will we sort of bend the curve to the more probable outcome? And early on, what we sort of observed in healthcare was trust matters, validation matters. How we bring our science to market around, scientific experimentation, validation. We had this crazy idea that let's lead with that. And that led us to embed ourselves at St. Michael's Hospital for 2 years at our expense, which is now Unity Health. And what was interesting about that journey is it allowed us to understand some really important things like security and privacy and how clinicians actually interact with data. Why is the problem, the way it is? And we published together the first ever natural language processing paper that compared some of our early work back in 2017 with manual chart reviewers who would go through and the results were quite exceptional. And it was the first ever peer-reviewed paper around natural language processing comparing to real-world electronic health record documentation. So not an academic data set, not, a study outside of care. We worked with clinicians in practice based on information that they needed to know in order to deliver better care. And Mike, you opened up about our mutual connection to Devora, and she's just a wonderful leader in the space that we have the privilege to be in. But she was at Roche at the time, and they were looking for advanced lung cancer patients on immunotherapy with liver metastases, and these data sets don't exist. And if you're a lung oncologist at Princess Margaret Cancer Center, for example, you want to know this data for your own research, your own quality improvement initiatives. And it's really, really hard, time consuming and expensive to get at that data. And it was really the innovation of folks like of Devora, of Mike Duong, who was at Roche, and a number of other individuals who said, if I read your paper correctly, You're telling me you can replace manual chart review, and this is as real world evidence, as an alternative and augmentation to sort of the traditional phase 4 random control trial for access and reimbursement type submissions was becoming more and more of a factor as precision care and precision oncology medications were really starting to accelerate. And Mike said, if we believe your paper, like this is huge. And they funded a study with Princess Margaret Cancer Center using our early algorithms. That was just a home run. 6 months later, we were presenting at World Lung in Barcelona. And of course, everybody likes to be the first to be second. And pharma companies started to call. And we made a decision again at that point, contrarian to, I would say, how most entrepreneurs sort of, have gone on their journey, again, with no judgment on that particular path. But we said, if we're going to solve this problem and really honor the legacy of Stephen's mother, you don't just build it overnight, validated AI that can actually unlock and accelerate clinical discovery within the health record. You need compliantly and ethically access to huge amounts of data. Remember, this was way before ChatGPT. So from an innovation perspective, we used ethics-approved retrospective non-interventional studies supported by life science partners, where we were the first commercial AI company to deploy AI in Canada ethically, compliantly, according to normal processes. But we were able to build our Darwin AI engine and validate our Darwin AI engine through that means, and have patient impact at the same time. We've now published over 45 studies using AI and sort of world leading. And in December 2023, we sold 51% of Pentavere to a company called HealWell AI. And then just this past summer, sold the back 49% of the company, and really just as passionate around how we can now scale and deliver on that original mission, to unlock and provide insights to help clinicians, help bring innovation to the market, and help patients, most importantly. And again, I'll just finish off for the audience. This is coming from individuals who spent just shy of 20 years in retail, in finance, but has been able to navigate and build a company of purpose, of meaning, of impact, create financial security for our families, and most importantly, at the sort of edge now of AI to really have impact with the global partners that we've been able to build and amass along the way. And lastly, I'll just finish with, this was all made in Canada. So at a time when we're talking about commercialization of AI, when we're talking about how do we create a Canadian society that is also sustainable, which needs commercial success. We're really proud to be an example, and now working with the government, Canada Infoway, CIHI, around how can we take the lessons of our journey and apply them, into our healthcare system.
That's really, really outstanding. Congratulations. That's just absolutely amazing. I can't wait to dive in with questions. I'm sure Mike feels the same. I can see it. So I'd love to kick things off by, as I listen to your story, and really when, we consider the aspect of reinvention, what really strikes me is this, as you highlighted, this incredible pivot from, the retail sector, far, far away from healthcare, but being able to, really become not only a big player, but changing the landscape and helping healthcare transform, which is, that next step beyond. So I'd love to hear from our listeners who themselves might be going through phases of transition and reinvention. Often the question that comes to mind is, well, I don't have that experience. I don't know that space. How am I going to ... So, Aaron, when you think back about your journey, what were those levers that you were able to leverage to get people, in healthcare to listen, to even come in when you don't have this backpack of, 20 years of, healthcare experience, but you bring something different to the table? What were the levers you were able to use to make that transition, to start having a dialogue that built on the trust?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And going back to that triangle that I described around great data and insights, great people, and great processes, you connect those dots and magic happens. And you rip those dots, you rip that apart, and the opposite happens. So one of the things, whether it's in finance, one of the things that I share when I tell our story to a capital markets group is I say, can you imagine if you are a hedge fund manager and you're making an investment in companies, yet you can only make that investment on 10% of the information around that company, even though the data exists? That's true in healthcare. Right? You don't need to have 20 years of experience in the healthcare industry, in the pharmaceutical industry, in healthcare policy to understand the magnitude, simplicity, impact, and mission of that particular, problem. When you think about retail, Mike and I have joked during our breakfast because, one of the big, call it, strategic levers right now we're seeing with our life science customers is the idea of omnichannel. Well, retail was talking about omnichannel in 2004. Well, what is omnichannel? Omnichannel is how do you truly understand your customer and impact them through all the various touch points that you have. So you go back to answer your question around healthcare. Well, if we're in an industry where the majority of data isn't being used and you're getting feedback that the processes are impacted by that, and clinicians aren't at their best and they know that as a result of that, then that was the story that we were clear, passionate, and was always our North Star. So maybe to circle back to your question about the audience is, you may not have 20 years of experience in an industry, but that's not what makes you special. That's not your superpower. Your superpower is your point of view. Your superpower is your courage. Your superpower is your passion on why you went into that industry in the first place, what you've contributed to it, and how can you take those skills, those lived experiences, those relationships that you've built, and apply that to the new challenge that you are facing. And often we think about reinvention as this big bang. Like all of a sudden I was in retail and bang, I went into a startup. I went into a healthcare company. But there wasn't a bang. Reinvention is sometimes out of necessity, but it's that sort of constant humility to say, I want to learn, I want to grow, I maybe want to fail. And if we think about sort of our journey, it was always about how can we get this data to the fingertips of clinicians? How can we help you, pharma company, accelerate your access and reimbursement protocols? And those drives isn't really that much different when we'd be having conversations. How do we create a better assortment for next season based on doing good for our customers? And that's really sort of that, I'm sure we'll get to it, that patient first ethos that Mike and I were talking about. But don't be afraid of your lack of experience. Be proud of the experiences that you have in terms of how you've showed courage, how you've worked with people, how you've solved problems. And if you focus on that, you can really accomplish anything.
Yeah, a great question, Marissa, and thanks. I want to kind of follow on that and maybe take even a little step back at that and get it a little more personalized, because I know the people who enjoy our podcasts are are at a pivot point where they're struggling with all of the things that you were dealing with. And tell us a little bit about, standing back and looking at Aaron holistically in terms of, where you were personally, where you were, from the family perspective, like all of the sort of like what's going on for you while you're going through, you've given us a, great insight to the technical evolution and the great product offering and everything that's transpired. But let's step back a little bit and talk about the journey from a more personalized perspective, because people are, they struggle. They're looking for, ideas. And I think your personal experience probably will be enlightening from that perspective. So take us a little bit back.
Yeah, no, thank you for pushing me to that space, because it reminds me that in my intro, I probably left out the most important part. One, I'm a father of 3 boys, and being a father and being a husband to my wife is incredibly important. I'm also a person of faith. I attend, services during the weekends, and that faith for me is always been important. When you have the conversation with your partner around there's a change, whether it's you're in transition from a job or you're leaving the safety of a paycheck every 2 weeks to try something new. That's a really important conversation to have. And, that partnership and that open communication and that vulnerability, I think reflecting back, Michael, to sort of open up and answer your question, was probably one of the most important sort of pivot points. So I remember at night I'd be grappling with, what does failure look like? What does failure look like? And it's a battle with your ego. So one thing I knew is no matter what failure was, I knew that I'd always be able to work hard, that I'd be able to get another job. And sure, we wouldn't live in a big house or we wouldn't have, these things, but we would be okay if my boys knew the sort of merits of hard work and respectful, and our family stayed, close. And I was very fortunate. My wife was on board of that. The other thing I visualized as I'm thinking about it is like 90% of these things fail. So would I be okay driving Uber to keep ends meet, or would I be too proud? Oh no, I was a VP at Canadian Tire, an AVP at Canadian Tire at 28. Was that my identity? Was important to me and what was driving me to sort of, take this jump? And my business partner, and because we had that conversation, because he had to have the same conversation with his wife and his family. And we came to sort of the peaceful place in the storm of chaos, uncertainty, self-doubt, that if we failed, if we had our health, we would be okay because we'd be able to work hard. So I share with the audience around, if you're doing it for reasons that are not just about prestige and financial gain, but there's reasons, either necessity or there's reasons above that, I would say find strength in that, in these moments that you are in. And looking back, you would be surprised how that strength helped you through, is the first thing I would say. The other thing that I found, an uncle of mine shared this with me when he lost his son. When I said, how are you doing? And he said to me, yards are hard, but inches are easy. And, when you think about the journey of finding a new job, reinvention, upskilling, taking on the incredible risk of being an entrepreneur, the word entrepreneur comes from the, undertaking, because it is the great undertaking. Inches are easy, yards are hard. and you can break down things into inches, bit by bit, and step forward and find meaning in those inches, you'll always move forward as long as you stay in the game.
That's outstanding. Thank you. I love that, actually. And I think it can relate to so many aspects of our life in terms of the yards and the inches, right? It's that one step. It's that first step to just get you to that next step. What I'd love to delve into a little bit deeper as well is this journey itself. You identified your partner. You guys, clearly had some great discussions to know you're on the same page and where you're going. And how does that journey unfold? Because I think of, the story that you just shared. It wasn't a linear path to, where you are today. It was a series of these twists and turns. Can you tell us a little bit about what role either your existing network played or the people around you in terms of helping you navigate, each step of that journey to get you where you ultimately, were to the, selling of the organization to, now where you stand, where it's fully owned by HealWell?
Yeah. Let me answer that in two parts. The first part is, it is a winding road. But I think life is a winding road, right? Nothing is a straight line. We stay true to our principles all the way through. And I can really sort of dive into that. Looking back, it's always easier to connect the dots, right? When you're in the sort of storm of the journey, you're just trying to break things down into those inches and move forward or sideways. And then, and when you do move backwards, and you will move backwards, how do you then have the courage and strength to put that step forward again? And you need principles. We started Pentavere back in 2017. It's now 2025. So, it's not like it's been a year or two. So through that journey, I've seen many healthcare entrepreneurs, start with a huge bang and then fail, raise astronomical amounts of money. Like when I say like hundreds of millions of dollars on similar stories, and then, blow out. And there's been those, ones who have succeeded. The common denominator of, who has succeeded and the ones where they didn't get the outcome that they wanted, and there's so many factors, is it was about the principles to those succeeded. Why are you doing this? Why are we starting a company? For what reason? And is that why continue to be the overarching how? We started a company, and I remember pitching early VCs saying, we have no idea what the product is. So I cannot answer your question around what recurring revenue is. What I'm telling you is literally 80% of the data in an industry that is 17% of most countries' GDP isn't used. And that causes the most amount of deaths on earth, right? You look at the 3 leading causes of death, according to either the OECD or the World Health Organization, right? Cancer, cardiovascular disease, medical error. We know cancer is all about prevention, right? We know cardiovascular is all about living healthier lives and guideline therapy, and medical error is medical error, all of which is a function of patients falling through the cracks. So if we believe that better data to create better processes to help our people can help, then that is the big idea. And that cannot be underwritten or wasn't underwritable from a VC perspective. So you could say, okay, are we going to fit that square peg into the circle hole? We chose not to. And we didn't chose not to because we didn't want capital to grow our business. We chose not to because the business plan that would have fallen out of that, we don't believe we would have been able to execute around the principles of the why. So the first thing is why, and stay true to that. And you need principles, because if you've got principles, it's like a GPS. You may get lost, but that will prompt you to get you back onto the road to the destination that you hope you can go to. Then it's just a matter of how do you ensure you have gas in the tank? And that's where I think the network comes in. The relationships that we built, both Steve and I, in our earlier careers, helped us. And the relationships and how we went about building relationships was the force multiplier. And what I would share is for people who are listening, who are in corporate roles, in transition, make your network about you, right? The network is Aaron to Mike, not CEO of Pentavere to former president of AstraZeneca, right? We get confused that our relationships are really about the roles. Your relationships and the powerful relationships are around the individuals that you build connection with. And those are the folks that will be your greatest enablers of the success that everybody can achieve.
That's so powerful. And I'm a huge subscriber to that theory. If I think about any of the value that I've been fortunate enough to create in the past, or as I look forward, the number one thing is the network, my network, and to personalize that and to put the time and effort into, keeping it vibrant. And, great examples of other people I've seen who really are so expert at, paying it forward and paying it back. As I listened to you speak about that, one part of that was about, or at least for me occurred, that there will be stumbles along the way. There'll be many stumbles along the way. You hope it's as few as possible, but let's face reality. There will be. Yeah. And so maybe you can just drill down just a little more on, how you managed through those stumbles, beyond the network element, which you highlighted, yeah. But what, because I know when people, have now moved to, okay, I'm going to do this. It would be great to have some tips about how am I going to manage the stumbles. So maybe enlighten us a little bit about your process.
Yeah. So the first is I was fortunate to have a few mentors who were able to share with me tradecraft. I don't know a better word to sort of articulate, but tradecraft around how to navigate and how to stay alive from the existential stumbles that are just part of the journey. So if, especially to the entrepreneurs who are at the beginning of wanting to form and start a company with the starry sort of vision around, it's going to be a home run, and it will be a home run, right? You got to believe that. But with that, you got to say there's going to be some really, really deep holes that you're going to have to dig out of. One of the things that we learned, especially with our customers being large enterprises, is you gotta keep the high ground, but at the same time, hold everybody accountable to the principles and values that we all talk about. Because let's face it, what are the most existential stumbles that will occur? They're predictable. Number one, you've got a customer contract that is on its way that you're counting on to fund payroll. And for a whole slew of reasons, it falls through. It could be because a product didn't get reimbursement. It could be because a new leader comes on board. There's a whole slew of reasons, but call it project falls through. What do? Another existential stumble is you lose talent, or you can't retain the talent to execute. Oh my God, I got this great customer, or, but now the person or the mind share that can deliver that has just left. what do you do? In each of those, the tradecraft that, we learned is always keep the high ground. So when a customer comes and says, we're taking away a contract, and even though it has nothing to do with you doing a bad job, but they may say it's because you didn't achieve this milestone. And there might be good political reasons behind their curtain why that is said, why that is not said. It's irrelevant. Our knee-jerk reaction is to sort of go in the mud. There's a famous quote that I love from George Bernard Shaw. It says, when you wrestle in the mud with a pig, and I want to be really, really clear, I'm not saying any of my customers are pigs, but the idea is, they enjoy it and you get, and you get, muddy. And I say that because you're a small company, you're an entrepreneur dealing with large, complex enterprises. So the knee jerk is to say, how dare you? You're wrong. Right? How could you end the SOW, the MSA says you owe us X. Don't do that. That is not how David beats Goliath. And it's the wrong thing to do, especially in healthcare. Be gracious and hold the high ground and say, listen, I understand that there's these huge issues. We're about patience. This is how we thought together we were going to have patient impact. How can we work through this? It lowers the temperature and opens up other avenues to partner where our knee-jerk reaction is not the same. Another trick, and this is from a mentor. So we all know at times how, especially with, some of our customers, sometimes, before the end of the year, they want to, money needs to be spent, which is great. It benefits everybody. And there's nothing wrong with that. Well, when there's a problem is when that project's canceled for whatever reason. And the finance team says, well, where were these milestones? Why was money paid? And everybody's scrambling. And we've all been part of that. You can say and point a finger to your business partner who did good for you again, or you can say, you know what, at a high level, we're a finance team, you're a finance team. How can we sort of elevate it to a compliance perspective, which again, nobody really wants to address, lowers the temperature, and you're able to get through. So I'm just giving two examples of real existential moments that we faced where we resisted the temptation to be upset. We resisted the temptation to point a finger. We needed to achieve the business objective of we still needed to retain that money. We still needed to save that customer. We needed to survive. But you can achieve that with the high ground. And there's a whole bunch of, ways that can be done.
Yeah, it kind of goes in line with your earlier comment about yards and inches. I mean, you're playing the long game. You're looking at making the advances on a yard scale basis, but there are some problems in some of these inches. The other thing that I heard in that, and correct me if I'm wrong, is there's a calmness and a let's not overreact. Let's think clearly. Let's stay calm. And I think those are two other, I don't think they're others. They're like components built into what you just spoke about. And that's really, really powerful. Thanks.
I would also add what I'm hearing is, clearly the relationship, right? Protecting that relationship, continuing to build on it, which leads to that trust, right? You got my back, I've got yours. We're going to do this together. We're going to figure this out together, which is, again, so critical as the business grows, as it, takes its twists and turns, but also as leaders. One thing that I think our audience would be interested in, and I'd love to hear myself, is as the business evolved and grew, everyone really struggles with this whole aspect of how do I scale? When is the right time to scale? How do I approach that? I'd love to hear more about that and how you guys approached it.
Yeah, scaling is a loaded word. So in order to scale from a business perspective, you need product market fit. And within that product market fit, you need the ingredients to scale. So I'm an AI company. We are an AI company. AI is an early technology, right? Scalable business models around AI that are sustainable are still being proven out. Scalable business models in digital health are still being proven out. Now, when you think about startup and venture, scale means capital raising, right? How do you demonstrate? How do we celebrate scaling? Is we're able to create a story that is fundable, and we've gone from $5 million to $20 million to $100 million of capital raise, and therefore corresponding market value. Well, is that really scale? Well, it might be, depending on what you define as scale. For us, scale was about, can we scalably unlock and accelerate speed to discovery of information and data within the electronic health record? So for us, scale was never about financial metrics. And that's a very contrarian point of view. For us, scale was about, can we scale this solution? And if we can scale this solution, the money will come. So the activities that we did early on the surface, experts in tech scaling would say there was nothing scalable. Yet, because we stayed to our principles, we're proving that our approach in this particular instance in healthcare was scalable. And I'll give you a perfect example. I was invited to speak on a panel about AI and scaling and trust. And one of the sort of words is now, innovation in healthcare only moves at the speed of trust, and the currency of AI is trust. And the moderator of the panel was a prestigious VC from New York who flew in. And when you look at what we've done at Pentavere from a scale perspective is we've deployed AI in hospitals, we've done studies, we've impacted well over 1 million patients. We were just presenting data at UEG this week in Berlin that has directly led to a label expansion with a pharma partner. AI generated data, regulatory grade, led to dose escalation in a product monograph. Those are all massive scaling events in the early days of AI. We were only able to do that because we built a foundation of trust. So she said to me, she asked me the question, Aaron, you seem to be able with AI to build trust and scale your solution. How did you do that? And I said, our first hire at Pentavere wasn't a chief revenue officer. It wasn't a product person. It was a privacy officer. Our big first investment was we poached the former chief privacy officer at UHN, University Health Network, who was a former regulator, because we knew that everything we heard, privacy and trust, is like the keys to unlock. And I turned to the VC leader and I said, if I would have pitched you, here's the problem. We have no idea what the product is. We have no sales plan. I can't tell you what the economics are around our recurring revenue. But we believe that the pile of poo, to use that is so big that there is for sure a pony inside. And our first hire is going to be the chief privacy officer because, we need to figure out trust and ethical data access to build models and all these things, and we got to do it compliantly. And I told you that story in the backdrop that 80% of the data is not used in an industry that is 20% of GDP. Would you fund me? She said, no, we wouldn't fund you. So what scale? So I'm asking the question, I keep going back to the principles of and the journey because there's so many winding world, if you're an entrepreneur and especially in a disruptive technology, you're a pioneer. And being a pioneer is hard. And I think about the Willie Nelson sort of poster that I saw at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is write your own song. So my advice to your audience is you got to write your own song tied to your principles of how you want to scale based on what scaling means to you.
So maybe we can continue along with that a bit. So you've given us some insight into one area of advice. If we were to ask you for, say, at least two more, let's round it out to three in total, what would your advice be to people relative to this whole transformational experience? Because people want to know.
Yeah. And I think this goes back to some of the questions you asked me, Mike, earlier about what was that conversation like with your family? What are those things? You're a father, you're a husband, you had to be okay saying it's, will I be driving Uber just to keep up ends meet? And can I visualize that? And that won't spiral me into depression. I think you got to find, and this is to the audience, you got to find your core of resiliency. You got to find what will make you resilient because you need to be resilient. I would argue, and I tell my sons this, even if you're not an entrepreneur, you need to be resilient. So what is resiliency and how can you maintain and keep your mojo up around resiliency? And that is sort of, I would say, the second sort of core. And we can unpack what resiliency may mean to me. I found resiliency in faith. And it's interesting. I did a podcast when we first sold the first 51%. I think it was called Built to Sell. And one of the questions they asked at the end of it was, what did you do with the money? And I said, we're fairly humble people, but I go to synagogue every Saturday. And there was a group of people and we would literally, it's an interesting dynamic. We would leave and we would drink whiskey. And that group was, very important. That's where I got my resiliency from. And I bought a very, very expensive bottle of scotch and celebrated it with that group of individuals. And that was all I needed. And to that, it was an amazing reaction from people all over the world. And I share that story just because that's where I got resiliency from. And it can come from so many different places. But you need to find your core of resiliency. And then maybe the third thing I would say is you got to maintain your integrity, your word. You're talking, Marissa, about relationships. It's so easy for all the right reasons to sort of start to slide on that, integrity scale, especially in the age that we're living in today. Don't. Truth matters. Your name matters. Your word matters. And stick with that.
As I'm reflecting on our conversation today, Aaron, what really strikes me is as you and your partner went through all of these twists and turns of the entrepreneurial journey, you really stayed true to these principles. And, if somebody were to ask me from this interview, what was your secret sauce? I think it was that. Because I've heard of so many people, chase sort of the next exciting thing, or indeed focus on, how am I going to sell this organization, or how much money am I going to make, which, obviously lots of us go into business for that. But the fact that your principles were not just there and on a piece of paper, but you were really living those values and that purpose every day. That was that North Star that just kept bringing you back. No, we're not going to head over there. We're going to head here. I think if there's one message I would love for our audience to walk away with, and I'm actually personally walking away with as well, is really staying true to that, no matter how, exciting it seems to go in that other direction, is just stay true to yourself and why you started. Because in those moments of very difficult decisions, right? Whether it's investing in something big, like I love your example of it's so out of, I never, ever, and I myself have also been in the business world for so long, never would I have imagined that your first hire would have been a privacy officer in this. But now with your story, it absolutely makes sense. And I can absolutely understand why your success was as phenomenal as it was. You really invested in the things that remained true to your purpose, your principles, and that really this has just come out so clearly in our discussion today, and I wanted our audience to, in case others didn't pick this up, I wanted to really highlight this, because for me it's a huge walk away as I reflect on our conversation.
Thank you.
I'm going to take a second and direct the audience's attention to just over your shoulder. There's a book. I'm one of the very fortunate people that received a copy of that book from you, which I'm humbled by and have to say thoroughly enjoyed. Tell us a little bit about the book.
So the book's called Stone by Stone. And one of the things, I guess I'm a reader. I've always been a reader from a young age, and probably over 20 years ago, I started taking notes of things, in different books that I would read, either a thought or literally just copying the sentence, the paragraph, and amassed, 3 or 4 notebooks of notes through the years. Now with AI and ChatGPT, I was able to transcribe and then upload. And I started playing around because it was an interesting, call it exercise, to say, if we were to start to summarize sort of 20 core ideas, 20 core principles that I guess sort of, I would pick up through the years and write, what would those be? And together, it was a true collaboration of me and AI. We landed on, these 20 ideas. A lot of them, I think, have come out in this conversation. Failure is fertile ground. Know the business you're in. Which is principles. And there's, a story around, one of the largest industries in the Northwest or Midwest United States was ice harvesting. Well, they thought they were in the ice business, but they were in the cooling business. They should have been, GE with refrigerators, but they were stuck trying to figure out how do they optimize the distribution of ice. Know what business you're in. Hope is a strategy, right? It's easy to be optimistic, but hope is saying, I'm going to stick with it and make things better. And I like art. I've been an art collector also for over 20 years. And when I say an art collector, it spans everything from buying something for $20 on the beach in Mexico. So it's about the image. So I paired the saying with a famous piece of art that I thought sort of captured the beauty and essence of that saying. And again, when you speak about relationships, Mike, so I printed the book and I give it away to friends, to customers, to new and old relationships. And it's a wonderful way to sort of create that foundation of relationships in this changing world where we're all trying to find partners, collaborators, to do business together or to do projects together. And it's my way of saying, here's some of the principles of, who I am and what I believe in. And I'm sharing this with you because my spidey sense says that you share in those principles. So let's build off of that foundation is sort of really the essence of the book and the essence of how I think people, your audience who are looking in transition, looking to break through in this age of disruption, let's go back to basics of it's about the relationships we have with each other that AI can't replace. And that's where, the magic will come.
Yeah. It's and again, thank you. It was such a beautiful gesture. And as I said, quite humbling. And I think it really is a summation of who you, in one way, it's a summation of who you are and where you've been, and some insight as to where you're going as well. So but I wanted to acknowledge you for that. But I think it's a nice little wrap to, what you've been about to this point, and as I said, and where you're going. Marissa, any final thoughts?
No, I just a huge thank you. But Mike, as we always do, we want to make sure our guest has an opportunity to share anything that we didn't discuss today. Aaron, that you would like to share with the audience, any messages or thoughts, anything at all?
Just want to share gratitude and maybe just one last, point to punctuate, which Mike, you opened up around the idea of patient first. It's something that if I were to summarize the journey, those principles, that North Star, that connective tissue is, Steve and I went into an industry with no experience, very little social capital, and really built some really meaningful relationships and massive shared successes. It was about that common putting that patient first, which is really in its essence saying, can you put others first? Can you have the courage in the dark times when you're running out of money? When, things that you believe are wrong are happening to you, and it happens. And there are malevolent people out there. I call them scoundrels, and you will interact with many of them. But if you're able to sort of, hold to that patient first principle, which is really the ethos of so many of the pharma companies we work with, the healthcare organizations we work with, I believe when you say what's next, that construct is the keys to unlock healthcare innovation. That patient first product first, patient first necessarily science first. And I don't, but is sort of, that unlock, and something I know Mike and I are going to be sort of talking about and building. And I can share with the audience at the end of this month, the Galian Foundation is holding its first ever patient summit at the same time as the forum. And, we've been able through, me winning the award and, building, to actually start putting patients at the center of that organization. So stay tuned. There's going to be a pretty exciting announcement. And again, when you talk about relationships, it's something that Michael and I are really excited about in terms of the impact it can have right here in Canada for our industry.
That's fantastic. And maybe just one thing to add on that, because I'm absolutely thrilled and excited to hear your news today. I'm currently attending Elevate, and whether you like Elevate or hate Elevate is irrelevant, because what I took from this week, germane to something you said very early on, is that I'm not anti any other country in the world. I'm pro-Canadian. And I really do believe that we're standing in the doorway of something significantly transformational for our country today that has been thrust upon us, but we are grabbing this and running with the ball, so to speak. And the tech world, the innovation world, is offering us the opportunity to really transform our country. Patient first is going to be both a driver and benefactor of great technical advancements and technology advancements. And this is such I am so full of optimism because of people like yourself, because of what's going on, and other guests that we've had that have shown us that with some courage and foresight and some really cool new sayings we can use, like yards and inches. Like that too. Not promising anything, but I really like it. We can accomplish so much. Just have to say once again, Marissa, always thrilled to be here with you, and just love our time together. So great being here today. And Aaron, I mean, I can't even begin to express my appreciation and gratitude for you being here today, but more importantly, just for having had the opportunity to be part of your world and to have our lives intersect like this. I can't wait to see where we go from here. But again, heartfelt, thank you so much.
Thank you
For giving us your time.
I feel the same way.
Same here.
And
same here, Aaron.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Really been a pleasure.
So, thanks for being here, everyone, and tell your friends. It's a passion project for us. We know there's a lot of great things being discussed. So, again, thanks for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you here next time. Take care, everyone.